This week, we're back in the studio after a bit of a hiatus, and we used a TikTok video as a jumping off point to discuss the nuance and complexity of solidarity and allyship.
This is Jews Talk Racial Justice with April and Tracy,
a weekly show hosted by April Baskin and Tracy Guy Decker.
In a complex world, change takes courage.
Wholehearted relationships can keep us accountable.
We're recording another podcast. We're back in the studio. Hi, Tracy. It's so good to be here with you.
Yeah, it's great to be with you, April. I mean, we've seen each other, but we haven't been like in the studio. I'm putting air quotes on
in the stewed together recording.
It's been a long minute.
Yeah, it's been a minute, but I'm excited to record this episode. For those of you who are connected with me on socials, you may know, and if you didn't, now you do. I'm on the tail end of a rough bout of food poisoning. So we're going to try to keep this juicy and concise because I'm pushing it a bit to be recording this. But because I love Tracy so much and I love y'all, and I especially love Tracy and our team, and we do so much great work, and this also feeds my spirit, I'd love to keep our momentum going. And for those of you who have been on this journey with us from the beginning, or, for a while now, at different points, I've talked about my ongoing spiritual and leadership evolution in terms of my heritage and spirituality and my journey toward ordination to become a Kohenet, a Hebrew priestess. And I'm not going to dive into all of that now, but just to say that for those of you who heard the episode last year around my ongoing process around more deeply connecting to my Indigenous Cherokee, Chickasaw, and Choctaw heritage, that work has continued in really significant ways. And as a part of that evolution and working to both own who I am and who I'm becoming, and also support myself in the process of becoming, I decided to sign up on TikTok and using some of these creative and various other techniques that I know, I decided I would do 3 posts a day for 30 days on my TikTok account, and on average. So if I'm, at times I might feel creative and do more, so that I can do less on some days, or like today and yesterday, since I am very sick, I didn't record any, and I'm just tacking on 2 days to the end of the 30 days. So anyway, all of this to say, welcome to our new friends who are joining from TikTok. It's so great to have you here. Thank you for helping amplify the stitch that I did. For those who don't know, on TikTok, people make videos and you can duet them where your video will be side by side theirs. And typically people do it to offer support, although I'm sure there's haters who use it for other things. Or you can quote unquote stitch a video where you pick a snippet of their video and then you jump off of that. You use that as a launch pad. And I did that on TikTok over the weekend, and I almost didn't post it. And I'm so glad I did, because it's now has around 7,000 views, and it's been steadily climbing.
Wow.
Yeah. So cool and interesting. And it was in response to a duet video that someone did. So if you visit my TikTok, which is at April Aviva Baskin, you can see
We'll put a link in the show notes.
Oh,
we'll
thank
put a
you.
link in the show notes too.
Tracy, you're so good with this stuff. Yeah. So I almost didn't post it, but I'm glad I did, because it resonated with a lot of our people. And one of our listeners wrote in the comments, so shout out if you're hearing this now, someone wrote like, "Oh, I didn't realize you were on TikTok. I love your podcast." So thank you for that. Thank you for connecting. Thank you for listening. And I think you were just being sincere, but also for offering social proof to people who are looking at the comments to see like, yeah, this person who I've never seen before actually has a podcast that actually has listeners. All of this to say, our Joyous Justice, and specifically our Jews Talk Racial Justice circle, is expanding, and it's kind of perfect and beshert. And to me, it's a wonderful sign from the divine, because as Tracy knows, I've been feeling like there's needed to be a bit of a shift. And I'm just taking it a step at a time, but I'm intrigued by this development of new folks coming in because it's reinvigorating me as we approach our 100th episode. So Abe Gurko and his handle is at won't be silent. So Jewish. You can't get much more Jewish than won't be silent. Right? I mean, it's also other groups, but like, you're trying to silence me, but no.
That's kind of his accent a little bit too.
Right? Yeah. Right. And so I love my peoples, and specifically I love my Jewish people. So, okay. So he did this video that was then duetted by TikTok user Paige Wolf, whose handle is at Paige Wolf 79. So basically, it's worth going and watching at Won't Be Silent, finding the video he does about Jews and people of color. And one thing that I did that I was expecting somebody to notice, but nobody did. But one thing is that I specifically, because I think, and he may have meant it pan-ethnically, but to me, in my mind, I thought, I decided to specify it in my video and say Black people, Black Jews and Black people, because I think, and in light of what he was saying and things, one could argue with it, but it seemed to me that that's what he was getting at.
Well, he does have those signs, like he does sort of green screen with signs that say, one says no Jews allowed and the other says no colored people allowed, like from the 50s. And so there's that is specifically kind of blending of people of color, which is pan-ethnic, and colored people from the 50s, which meant Black people.
Right. And he changed it to say people of color, but in my mind, when it was saying colored people, they were specifically referring to Black folks.
Agreed.
And so, and given all of this history and things, so as I said in my stitch of this video, yeah, I agree. It would be great for us to partner. And what I know from being a Black person in the Jewish community and in the world is that there are very real reasons why, from both ends of the community, as well as all of the oppression and dynamics that are hitting both communities and our society in general, why this can be more complicated. But I did want to validate, and I appreciate, I think part of why his video got a lot of views. One, he has a pretty large platform on TikTok, and also why my video is going viral is because a number of Jews, I mean, part of it may also be because I'm charming, but
charming,
but is because a lot of Jews profoundly desire this connection and this alliance and this partnership and this sense of belonging with kindred aligned folks who have also been deeply targeted by oppression. And that without the added trauma or dysfunction or other things that play out around that is a beautiful, pure, wonderful, uncomplicated desire. And in terms of the complexity and layers of it, we've had a whole podcast that's approaching 100 episodes to get into all of the nuances of why this is harder than why it is worthwhile, and also why it's harder than it may seem on its face, but that it's also achievable.
Yeah.
So, and to me, there's some core elements here that we've talked about a lot, but especially for newer listeners, I'll just name. Also, it's always helpful to know when we're talking about Black-Jewish relations, it's always helpful to name and notice that these communities are not completely separate, that there's overlap, and that there are Black Jews, and also that within each of these communities, each of these groups of people are not monoliths, and they may share an identity, but that there are different perspectives and elements and all those different things. And those different facets also add to some of the complexity of the antagonism and the friction that can happen between the communities. And also both groups have an immense each have immense bodies of work. Both groups and those of us who exist in the intersection, we all have immense amount of work, and more so for those of us who do live at the intersection, to do around healing from the trauma that has affected our peoples, to become aware of how heavily and how significantly this impacts how we show up. One of the core challenges that the Black and Jewish communities face is that they have been and are both targeted by whiteness, but historically and in the present moment, it plays out very differently. And what each of the communities have at stake, I've been thinking about this a lot lately. We've talked about it in some of our episodes, or in an episode at least, about, and also too, there's different things at stake for both communities. You know, like the Jewish community as a whole, I've started to realize in some ways this has been an asset, but spiritually and in terms of liberation, it's a huge challenge. The Jewish community has a complex set of relational dynamics with its close proximity to whiteness.
Yeah.
Right. And so that's at stake. So as we talk about a true partnership, one of the things that comes up to me is that part of what that's going to mean is Jews establishing a different relationship or disavowing that, whereas Black folks are the anchor that holds the entire racial hierarchy in place. And so we have a very, and I was born into that and live into that, even as a lighter skinned Black person. But my orientation to whiteness, because I've had enough experiences throughout my life that said, you are literally the opposite of worthiness. You are the opposite of this, that, in the context of joy and courage and other things, there are many more risks I am willing to take because I can't lose something that I never had.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think,
and the stakes are very different for a lot of white Ashkenazi Jews.
I think that point is really important. I've been thinking a lot about it lately in terms of the generational difference, right? Because my grandparents' age, actually had further gap to acceptance as whiteness, and they knew the danger and the lethality of anti-Semitism as a racialized thing, you know, from the Shoah. Whereas like even my parents' generation born after the war, but especially my generation born in the 70s, 80s, etc. Like I only have known Jewishness as being married to whiteness. That's the identity that I have known, which my grandparents didn't. And so your point about what is at stake, it's important too to remember that sort of the distance or lack thereof. Even thinking about the TikToker that you were referencing with the signs that he had in his background, which were from the 50s.
Generational, right.
That were a previous generation whereby Jewishness was further from whiteness, or further from being accepted as white.
Right.
By mainstream
still closer,
America.
but
closer
not,
than Black
not,
folks.
Yeah.
But not where it is
not
now.
On team, not as second class citizens and team white, which is basically what it is now. And at times I often push back when different folks, whether they be in the UK, although that has its own dynamics in some ways, or in the States, when Jews talk about when they experience racism. And I'm like, I prefer the word bigotry, because you're still being treated as someone who's not white.
Yeah.
I get all those experiences you're talking about are being treated as, to me, that's more about bigotry or discrimination. It's not, you're still in the fold in some way. And I, as you know, I've often used this phrase on this podcast. I often talk about conditional whiteness, and I would even say that it's a conditional whiteness, but it's still whiteness.
Yeah.
Right. And so how do we start to talk? And so this is one of the things in the context of our podcast and other programs and offerings we've provided and run and continue to offer about how do we support our people around more deeply understanding this, around finding themselves in it. Unrelatedly, one of the thoughts I was having as you were talking a few moments ago, to me, a big part of the Jewish piece here for our people, which we've talked about again in a prior episode, is about finding and understanding and reorienting to what safety means. Like as you were talking, you were naming, that there was a process. Like it didn't just happen that this generational shift happened. There were choices made along the way that Jews made in the context of oppression and inherited and current day traumas, where with the best knowledge and understanding they had, they chose safety. And what safety looked like to them was upward mobility, was moving, it was participating and not necessarily being fully conscious of it, although at times being aware of it, participating in white flight, of leaving Black people behind. There are parts of these histories and this generational shift and these dynamics that we need to look at and be aware of and own in our story as we're talking. So when we talk about partnership and we come to the table, we can actually make some progress, because depending upon the level of engagement with the Black person on the other side of the table, you could hear a range of different things from yes, absolutely. And they're literally, you hear this whole spectrum from Black influencers, just people on social media. And similarly, you also hear a range of these different spectrums for Jews in different ways. But from like, yes, I think absolutely Jews and Black people need to totally be in it together, to a number of people from the New York area who might say, yeah, I don't have a great history with Jews in my life, in my neighborhood. And not just one person, a lot of them. And I saw them regularly hurting my Black people. To prominent Black clergy who, not publicly, but privately in conversation, say a range of things. One of them being, I've been open for 10 plus, 20 plus years to meaningful, true relationship and partnership with Jews. And when something happens to me, or when I reach out to them for help, they're not there. Right. That there are a bunch of missed signals here. And as someone who's in between these dynamics, I see at times what's happening. Like, oh, my Jewish people are terrified right now, and they're in their trauma response, and they have no idea right now that they're letting down, and like my Black folks right now don't understand that Jews are in their terror response, that they're not actually although it's actually, they're doing both. They're both exerting white racism, but it's more about their terror that's manifesting through their oppressor pattern, but they're actually terrified, and they're not actually trying to keep you down. They're just trying to live, like I just see these different things playing out. And these are all things that are figure outable and that can be healed and processed, that we can become aware of and anticipate and avoid and shift. But there's all of this is just a little bit of an expansion into the yes and that I gave in my stitch of, yes, I agree, this would be amazing. The other piece that I want to say here is that this is a core way that oppression works, and this is a theme that recently came up at the workshop I attended, well, until I got sick, but the workshop that I attended this weekend, Black African Community Development and Liberation. It used to be called BLCD, Black Liberation and Community Development, but they're doing a lot of work on integrating the Black African diaspora with people on the continent. So now they're calling it Black African, which is very cool. And they said that we might continue to evolve it. So that's a really cool development. And I love their leading edge thinking around that. And one of the things that Professor Barbara Love talked about at that workshop, specifically just for Black people, and this is also very much true in the context of Blacks and Jews, is that the primary work for Black and African heritage people is healing. One of the core goals and actions of colonization has been to constantly separate us from each other. Is to constantly, through tearing apart our families, the languages, and cultivate mistrust among each other. Now, interestingly, a side note, which I'm not planning on getting into right now, an effect of the trauma on Jews is to not trust the other. The impact of thousands of years of anti-Jewish oppression is also not to trust each other to an extent, but is more about not trusting any allies. And this gets very complicated in the context of, and that is a core pattern that plays out with Black folks, as they're trying, and other folks, but especially as they're trying to be an ally. And then, so there's healing that's needed, because part of it is about like getting folks to do more. And some of it is us to get enough healing to allow in what folks are doing, what are doing and have been doing, that we, without realizing it through our trauma, have been undermining and stopping. But so she talked about how, which is so true, about us being seen as not enough in our Blackness, and that a core part of our work is to constantly reach for each other and to not let that division get in the way. So when professional, both in the context of healing, but also in the world, for us to be connected and honor one another. And to me, there is a very similar dynamic here between Blacks and Jews, where this is the core hurt for, among many, many things, obviously, but in terms of that keeps us from accessing our full power with each other as Black and African heritage people. And to me, it's sort of similar between Black people and Jewish people, where there are a number of different dynamics that have served to drive substantial wedges that can be dissolved, but we need to really be aware of them, not be in denial of them, also not get overwhelmed by them, recognize that these things aren't bigger than us, but they are formidable. So we do need to be aware of them, so we know how to navigate them effectively, and also notice what of those things we've internalized. Because by getting healing around those things and shifting that, it might be formidable, but it ain't got nothing on us if it's no longer our kryptonite. It might be happening. It's back to that metaphor that I've shared many times that Barbara Love gave at a different than BLCD, now BALCD, of the oppression table. That in order for oppression to stand, it needs it's a two-peg table. The oppressor's oppression and the oppressed internalization. And that you only need to destabilize one in order for the oppression to not be able to exist. And so that's why I'm so big on this healing piece and doing the inner work, not necessarily fully because it's a cure-all, but as we heal these things, it's not that it stops the external from happening, but it completely shifts whether or not it has any power over us, and how we move through the world and how we start to navigate around it and get ahead of it. So that's a little bit of a foray into the Jews Talk Racial Justice orbit. And we decided to extend now through Friday, or perhaps the weekend too. We'll probably still keep the page up, but we're saying Friday. But we extended the deadline in part because I'm getting more traction on TikTok, and I haven't even really yet even talked about Grounded and Growing, but we have 2 programs we're running right now. On the last episode, we gave the discounts. Tracy now or in the outro may share that information. But if what we said resonated and or you were charmed and bedazzled by our amazing wit and brilliance, there are 2 opportunities that we have for you to engage with us in a smaller, mindful cohort group setting this summer in a matter of days. So you can find more information on our website, and Tracy created a couple discounts for our podcast listeners. Do you want to say anything else, Tracy? I'm losing steam here.
No, I think this was a great sample episode. Life is just more complicated than life, and relationships and dismantling oppression is more complicated than many people give it credit for. We can't get it done if we underestimate it.
Well, actually, and thank you for saying that, because I think actually Hopefully, but that's exactly what it is, Tracy. And because of that, then people feel super disempowered.
Yeah.
But what they don't realize is if they just had a bit more information and a few more core skills, which is why we created Grounded and Growing, is to help. And I think we may change the name in time. We in part just use that name. It's a wonderful name, just to manage expectations, because we're covering a distilled large volume of material in a relatively short amount of time. But it's really about resilience and self and broader awareness, bringing a trauma-informed lens, and giving people the core insights and tools you need to continually get stronger and stronger and more resilient and more visionary over time. And I love what you said there, Tracy. And I feel like we could potentially do a whole episode about that in the future. So I don't need to talk about it now. But what you just said is that people don't understand it, and then they get rolled over by it. And they feel, and then it taps in from a trauma-informed perspective, then it taps into their early defeats, and it just becomes something that they can't overcome.
Right.
And what I'm saying is, through trauma-informed awareness and or healing, if you want to go even deeper, actually, and more education, which you can get through Joyous Justice and a range of other resources, as you start to, and that's what I love about our teachings, is we teach the core things you need to know, and also some of the core reframes, so that you know what you're dealing with. And you might still not win the next time you try, but you might notice, ooh, I'm getting traction. And I tried this strategy and I actually got so much further and opened up new conversations. Let me try that again and see how I can get that further. Is that new doors and pathways can start to open. And it just takes that much more insight, and also getting, although I'm noticing too, that there's some disheartening, I could just keep talking forever about this, Tracy, but that a number of folks too, and this isn't to undermine, because I still think this is also true, although it seems slightly contradictory, but it's not, that I notice, especially in our community, and I definitely have had this too on my spiritual journey, is that I notice that folks seem to just constantly be looking outside for the next thing. And to me, it's much more about some of the core principles and reframes and insights, and getting and deepening and going for the depth of understanding and repeating those core lessons at greater depths. And once you get those, to me, it's like piano lessons. Like once you know the core classical elements, once you have the scales and different things and you really master those, there's not some other magical scale you need to know. You just need to really get good at that, and then build and move from strength to strength.
Or like in our fitness metaphor, it's like you keep looking for the pair of shoes that's going to make you run the marathon, when really,
or the specific exercise regimen.
It's the running. You just have to keep going,
right? Or like a special routine, as opposed to being about eating healthy food and working on your mobility and using proper form and getting better and better at using the correct form. And that it's through that and through building that musculature, and not some magical, although there might be some amazing program, but it's less about some magical thing and more about the core pillars and building the foundation, really getting a solid foundation in this, specifically because a core way that racism and other forms of oppression operate is to undermine our sense of knowing. So one of the best ways to equip ourselves and not be overwhelmed by these things is to really more thoroughly and foundationally understand them, and have a suite through Grounded and Growing of antidotes and tools and resources that you can customize to your needs in any given moment or phase of your leadership, to help you navigate them and metabolize these experiences. So not only are you no longer defeated by them, that you might still experience some sort of loss, but you're able to metabolize it in a way that you can get different insight and figure out how to more skillfully navigate these moments moving forward. Because oppression is not bigger than us. It is on our skin. Occasionally it's in us like an infection. We can get healing, and it might be a little painful temporarily, especially if it's an infection that's gone a little bit inside, but that pain is the healing. So we just need to get these resources, continue to heal. I need to let this.
We got to wrap this up. I'll see you next week, April.
All right. Much love, T.
We've extended the registration deadline for both Grounded and Growing and Shift Your Life in 60 Days until Friday, July 22nd. And Jews Talk Racial Justice listeners get a special discount. Simply enter the coupon code JTRJ22 at checkout to get your discount. Hope to see you soon.
Thanks for tuning in. Our show's theme music was composed by Elliot Hammer. You can find this track and other beats on Instagram at Elliot Hammer. If this episode resonated with you, please share it and subscribe. To join the conversation, visit JewsTalkRacialJustice.com, where you can send us a question or suggestion, access our show notes, and learn more about our team. Take care until next time, and stay humble and keep going.